There's a lot of life in this jungle, Rosallo calmly told the 6 men at his feet. The men looked up at their leader, clinging to every word he spoke. Clinging and believing. There's also a lot of death. That is why we are here, is it not? To be close to beautiful death. To respect its power. The men nodded and murmured assent. One man dared to let his gaze drop down to Rosallo's still bleeding hand. He was lucky Rosallo didn't notice. We are masters here in our village, Rosallo said. Masters of life and death. And so we will rule as we see fit, without prejudice, without mercy. The men shifted under the glare of those words, but they still didn't look away from their leader. Now, Rosallo continued, bring me my wife and son. Marie dashed through the dark jungle with little Jean-Paul in her bloody arms. For a moment she worried about getting blood on her baby. However, that moment of clarity gave way to the need to pay attention to her flight. The night was at its deadliest. One misstep and her husband's men would catch her. Marie ducked under a low branch, swatting away the wide leaves that billowed in her wake. She took stock in that she was slowly descending the mountain where her village was hidden, descending to the valley of sorts where the town was. The slope was gradual, not really noticeable due to the hearth of foliage that pocked the land. If she fell, she would not roll to her doom. The men chasing her would take care of that. Jean-Paul gurgled once. Marie looked down and saw that some of the blood had gotten on his delicate forehead. It was her husband's blood, Rosallo. She sliced his palm with a large sliver of wood during her escape from the village. An escape made foolhardy in the pitch black of night. An escape made possible by her desperation. She would have rather risked stumbling and falling in the darkness than remain with those monsters who would harm her Jean-Paul. She had to be near the town. Her only plan was to go to the church. She hoped it would truly be a sanctuary for her and her son. Beyond the beating in her skull, she heard an indiscernible yell from close behind her. A male voice. Marie didn't stop. One of Rosallo's men must have seen her. She couldn't let them get her baby. She realized too late that she had broken through the jungle and was on the outskirts of town. The priest, Nolan, checked the front doors. They were unlocked as they should have been. It was a church, after all. His mission was to spread the word of God here and hopefully save souls from the hellish lifestyle this part of the world had sunken into. In the heart of a rundown jungle town, the church sat, weathered and worn by the elements, just like the people who lived here. Nolan left the dim lights on despite the generator drain. The church was not afforded an electrical hookup by the local government. As far as the higher-ups were concerned, this place was just another useless shack. Nolan was almost back to his bedroom in the rear of the building when the front doors flew inward. He swung around and saw a woman cradling a blanket in her arms. "Help me!" the woman screamed. The panic in her voice was itself terrified. Nolan ran to the door, although his brain wanted to rebel. As he got closer to her, he could make out wet blood smeared on her face and arms. The woman looked at him, but didn't see him. Terror blinded her. Before Nolan could act, the woman rushed to one of the pews at the front of the church. Sitting down, she began to whisper to the bundle, calming what Nolan deduced to be a baby. Nolan peeked outside and scanned the quiet street for the source of the woman's plight. He braced himself to face anyone, from a psychotic rapist to a jealous husband. He wanted neither. To his relief, all was quiet. Even the bar at the other end of town was dead. Nolan shook his head as he slammed the door shut and locked it. "Ma'am?" Nolan said as he approached the woman. He could clearly see that there was indeed a baby in the bundle. There's no one out there. Who are you running from? The yellow lights flickered. The woman was wiping the baby's face clean with a corner of the blanket. Ma'am? She looked up at him. In broken English, she said, "You don't look like the priest I saw a while ago." Nolan smiled. The woman was correct. When he first arrived here several months ago, he was all about the black and the collar. But the humid weather quickly sank in, forcing him to trade in his church garb for khakis and linen shirts. "What's your name?" Nolan asked her. The woman tried to smile. Marie. She held her baby up proudly, yet protectively. And this is Jean-Paul. Nolan smiled at the baby, who had no idea of the predicament he and his mother were in. "Who's chasing you?" Nolan asked. The lights flickered again, then went out. Marie shot up from the pew. Nolan couldn't hear the hum from the generator. In that silence, he heard a million imagined sounds. Distant rushing water, small creatures pittering across the roof, something heavy dragging in dirt. "It's just the generator," he told her. He started to move toward the rear of the church to check on it. "It's probably out." She hushed him so he could hear the voices. Male voices. From outside. Soft, low, focused. It dawned on them that the voices were just outside the front doors. Marie ran out of the worship room into the back where Nolan lived. "Marie!" he whispered as loudly as a whisper would allow. The woman didn't come back. The locked door slightly buckled. Whoever was outside was trying to get in. A scream from where Marie ran tore through the church. Nolan ran into the back just in time to witness a chilling scene. Amid the ambient light from the windows that lined the cramped hallway, Marie stood with her baby clutched to her chest. Blocking the trembling woman was a man. If Nolan could have seen the sneer on the man's face, his apprehension would have returned tenfold. "Rosallo," Marie sobbed. She swayed to the side, allowing Nolan to see the long knife in the man's hand. Rosallo advanced on the woman. His every step was heavy and loaded with menace. His knife bobbed as if accusing her of some misdeed. "Rosallo," Marie repeated. Every syllable she spoke gnawed on Nolan's heart. "Please." The priest wanted to help Marie, but he could not force himself to act. Deep down, he really wanted to run. But with the commotion at the front doors and this Rosallo blocking the way, he was stuck in this vault of fear. Rosallo stopped a few steps from Marie. The woman's labored breathing provided the soundtrack to this scene. In, out. The rhythm intensified the tension in the hallway. "Marie," Rosallo flatly said. "Where do you think you are going?" Marie sobbed harder. Nolan did not dare move. "I am your husband," Rosallo continued. "Listen to me. Do not run. There is nowhere you can go that I cannot." "Don't hurt our baby," the woman begged, holding her blanketed child tighter to her heaving chest. Rosallo just grinned at that. "I won't. His end will be brief." He plunged his blade into the bundle she held. A gasp of shock left Marie's mouth. The blade went through the blanket and deep into her abdomen. Her eyes widened with the realization that death had come for her. The bundle, little Jean-Paul, fell away from her. Rosallo scowled at what fell to their feet. The blanket slowly became bloody, soaking what was seeping out from Marie's stomach wound. But there was no baby. Nolan's heart pounded as he ran back into the church proper, hoping to avoid the menace in this compromised sanctuary. He reached the pew where Marie had been sitting and spotted the baby underneath the bench, placed there by his mother in a desperate attempt to give him a chance at life. He scooped the precious bundle. Jean-Paul was his responsibility now. He knew that he had to do whatever he could to protect this innocent life from the horrors that awaited them outside and inside the church doors. There were two possible exits from the church, the front doors or the back door. However, regardless of which door Nolan chose, there was a risk that the men attempting to break in could be lurking outside, waiting to ambush them. The one who stabbed poor Marie was definitely inside, probably finishing her off. Nolan heard the shuffling of feet just before Rosallo entered the room. Nolan had to move. The priest ducked before Rosallo saw him. He crouch-walked to the back as Rosallo made his way forward. It only took seconds, but Nolan felt as if hours had crawled by. Nolan couldn't help but imagine the mess Rosallo's long blade was leaving on the wooden floor. In the hallway, Nolan suddenly paused. There she was, Marie, on the floor, not moving. Nolan smelled dirt, sweat, and something else he couldn't identify. Syrupy and pungent. Nolan wanted to help her, but not with the baby's safety at stake. Besides, what if she was already dead? His skills did not extend to resurrection. His mind raced through possible escape routes. The back door was not an option. Other intruders could have been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportunity to pounce. Voices filtered throughout the church, prompting Nolan to duck into the tiny kitchen. It was now obvious to him that Rosallo and his men, however many there were now inside the church. They would undoubtedly check every room for the baby. The tiny kitchen. No doors, no windows, and if there was, what would be waiting outside? There was no exit from the church. The men's voices were closer. They were definitely in the hallway now. Nolan noticed the kitchen was not as dark as it should have been. There was light, filtering in, from outside. The sink! The sink got its water from a pipe attached to the well outside. The wall holding the pipe held it in the loosest sense. The pipe sat at the bottom of a hole in the wall that was screened to keep bugs and larger vermin out. This hole was large enough for someone of Nolan's stature to squeeze through, and the screen could be kicked out rather easily. But the noise was sure to attract Rosallo and the intruders. Nolan hoped he was quick enough to avoid such attention. One kick and the wire mesh was flat on the ground. The men got louder, more alert. They heard the commotion. Nolan pushed the oddly quiet baby out of the hole before him, wary of those who could be waiting. There was either certain death inside the church or possible death outside. He shifted his weight around and slid outside as fast as he could. He imagined the intruders racing into the kitchen and grabbing his legs, or those outside raising their machetes only to bring them down on his neck, or onto the baby. But nothing happened. Nolan and the baby slipped through before anyone entered the kitchen. Once outside, Nolan rashly decided to seek the help of the local grocer. The grocery wasn't open this late, but the owner's family lived in the back of the meager store and were not completely ambivalent to his cause in the town. Plus, having this baby had to guarantee their help, since the grocer's wife was pregnant. Hopefully, she would at least be sympathetic to his need to protect the child. Nolan's thoughts lingered in the church. The baby's mother was still in that gloom, bleeding to death, or already dead. Can't help her now, he told himself. He took off into the night. Someone rounded the corner of the church from behind and followed him. The grocer was jolted awake by the frantic pounding on his door. He was a worn, elderly man with deep wrinkles etched onto his face. However, he wasn't too old or rough to have a young wife and 2 children with one on the way. He cautiously made his way to the front door of a small store and peered through the small, grimy windows set into it. To his surprise, he saw the American priest standing outside, looking tense and agitated. The grocer hesitated for a moment. Nolan knocked again. his urgency palpable. "Hold on," the grocer said through the wood. He turned the deadbolt and Nolan burst in. "Lock it," Nolan demanded. Without further questions, the grocer took his eyes off the priest and the baby he was holding. He trusted the priest's judgment, knowing that he was always level-headed. He believed there must have been a good reason for the priest's panic. "Father," the grocer said, "what is wrong?" The grocer saw that the baby was a native and gradually realized what was going on before Nolan even spoke. The priest just brought trouble into his store and home. "I need to get to the constable," Nolan said. "I can't do that with the baby. Can you watch him?" Heavy footsteps from outside fell and stopped. Both grocer and priest eyed the door. "Father, I cannot help." "Please," Nolan said. "I can't take him with me. It's too dangerous outside." The grocer just shook his head. I want to help," he told Nolan. Nolan understood. The grocer, a local, didn't want to betray his people and bring trouble down onto his home and family. But the baby, and his mother. Nolan knew this wasn't how God wanted it, and definitely not the way he wanted it. This wasn't right. A shuffling from the back set Nolan on edge. Had the men gotten inside? The grocer's wife, a heavily pregnant woman with curly brown hair tied back in a messy bun, emerged from the back of the store with a concerned expression on her round face. She wore a faded pink floral dress that hugged her swollen belly. She furrowed her thick eyebrows and asked in a worried tone, "What's going on?" The woman's gaze went from her husband and Nolan to Jean-Paul. Her worry turned to excitement as she attended to the child. "Father," she said, "whose baby is this?" She said her name was Marie. She was running from her husband. "Come," the grocer's wife eagerly told Nolan, ushering him and the bundle of joy into the living area. "No more running tonight. Stay with us until morning." The grocer grunted. The voices outside faded, their sources retreating. The ghost town at night became a sadder sight with the day. People milled around without destinations or purpose. A few kids kicked a soccer ball instead of being in school. There was no school. Worn-down men sat outside their homes instead of working. The mere existence of the town was a mystery, but even the lost had to live somewhere. Amid this scene, between two buildings of equal size and questionable quality, stood the constable's office. Inside, Nolan sat across from the town's head lawman, Jacoby. The desk separating them was clean, allowing Nolan an unobstructed view of the lawman's growing sweat stains that leaked out from his armpits. Tacked up on the wall behind Jacoby was a large map of the town, surrounding jungle and mountains. All of it was rough terrain. "And what do you want me to do?" Jacoby asked Nolan. The priest leaned over to stress his point. "Come with me to the store and take the baby, then go get his mother. We shouldn't even be talking about this." Jacoby pondered the request for a moment and then smiled. Jacoby waved his meaty hand at the map behind him. "This may not seem like a large country, but it is." Nolan knew what Jacoby pointed to wasn't the entire country, but allowed the man to continue. "My district alone is more than I can handle," the constable continued. "For me to go with you for this baby and his mother, this is not realistic." "Not realistic? You're the law here." Jacoby chuckled, and Nolan realized then that the man was completely useless, solidifying a long-held thought. "Law?" Jacoby said. "I break up bar fights. I settle disputes over chickens. There is no law here, Father." "Let's wait. She may show up yet." "A woman is dying and you want to wait?" Father, I understand your concern completely. However, some truths may be difficult to accept. The mother may already be dead." Nolan jabbed his finger at the shortwave radio parked on the file cabinet next to the desk. "Just call for help!" "That radio is for emergencies, fires, mudslides. Not for a simple missing woman. Nolan shot up from his seat. Jacoby flinched, thinking the priest was going to reach across the desk and strike him. Nolan thought the same thing too. Instead, Nolan told the fat man, "Constable, I will contact your superiors about this. No, don't get up to see me out." Jacoby watched the priest storm out. Nolan was pissed off. Pissed off at the constable's intolerable inaction. Pissed off at himself for requesting to come to this town. Pissed off at himself for even being pissed off. Nolan passed several townspeople in the street who just kept going, not acknowledging his presence, him barely acknowledging theirs. Nolan felt a pang of hurt in his gut. He couldn't help everyone here. Nolan was close to the store, just a few short blocks away, but it might as well have been miles. A man trailed him from the next street over, noticeable at each intersection. A man with an indiscreet interest in the priest. Nolan immediately saw him. Nolan fought to keep his cool. Whoever was following him could have been one of the men from the night before. Having already tried to enlist the constable's help and failing, Nolan knew he was on his own. Nolan slowed at an intersection and looked over at the next street. No one appeared until after Nolan cleared the intersection. The man entered the parallel crossing, looking in Nolan's direction. Nolan sped up. He passed another intersection with the man keeping the same pace, but lagging just one step behind. Nolan could think of only one thing to do. He quickly backtracked and cut across to the street his pursuer was on. Although Nolan only caught a glimpse of the man's back, he didn't notice any visible weapons. However, anything was possible. The man, a local, Nolan figured by his dark complexion and dirty clothes, still stood at the next intersection up, head bobbing side to side, trying to find the priest on the next road. When he couldn't, he turned around to find the roles of hunter and prey reversed. It was like a scene from a Western movie. The good guy on one end of the street, the villain on the other. However, both men didn't expect such a face-to-face encounter. Nolan shook all over, and the stunned look on his hunter's face told its own story. A story that ended with him turning tail and running away up the street. Nolan considered giving chase, but he had to stay on track. He had to get back to the grocer and bring Marie and John Paul to safety. Plus, he was woefully unprepared for any physical confrontation. Nolan had no formal self-defense training, but he was confident he could throw a punch if necessary. Nolan waited until his stalker was out of sight before pressing on. He still felt the sense of someone following him. He let that paranoia guide him cautiously to the grocery. The store was a familiar place with friendly people inside. That's what Nolan needed right now, to feel safe. This terror would soon be over. A few yards from the store, Nolan watched the front door open. The grocer stumbled out onto the street, clutching his stomach. Nolan stopped in his tracks. Blood gushed from the spot beneath the grocer's hands. Nolan rushed to the wounded man just as the latter fell to his knees. The grocer looked up in Nolan's direction, but not at the priest. "Father," he started. He couldn't continue. He could only manage to point at the store before he went limp. Nolan hurried inside. The store showed no signs of distress. Nonetheless, the safety Nolan yearned for moments prior was soon a distant wish. By the time he made it to the back where the grocer and his family lived, he knew he would never be safe, here or elsewhere. Nolan saw the grocer's young son and daughter first. The boy was small and wiry with a shock of curly hair. His sister was a bit taller, her head dripping with unruly braids. They huddled in the corner, half hiding and half looking at the body in the middle of the room. Nolan caught a whiff of feces from the direction. At least they were alive. Then he saw their pregnant mother. She was face down among the pieces of the coffee table. Her blood pooled all around her. Nolan never knew someone could have that much blood. He felt a pang of remorse when he realized he didn't know the name of this family that tried to help him. Through fearful tears, the two children looked at Nolan, then at their mother. Nolan didn't know what to do. He needed to do something, anything. All he could think of was to squat next to the woman and touch her shoulder. He almost vomited when her body moved away from her head. Two jeeps crawled up the narrow, dusty road. The unrelenting heat of the jungle pressed in around them. The front jeep carried 5 soldiers, the rear 4, plus Jacoby and Captain Floor in the back seat. The 5 soldiers in the front jeep were young and nervous. They clutched their weapons tightly, ready for their commander to bark orders at them. Some of them exchanged tense whispers, their voices barely audible over the roar of the engine and the creaking of the suspension. Jacoby occasionally peered over the shoulders of the soldiers in front of him. He ignored Captain Floor beside him. Jacoby thought Floor would command the jeeps to enter the jungle, stop for a few hours, then return to town empty-handed, an elaborate show for the priest. But no. Floor demanded that Jacoby join them on this operation. Jacoby couldn't believe Floor, someone cut from the same cloth as him, would follow through on this. The distracted constable noticed movement alongside the jeeps. A human figure. A man. Maybe more than one. Jacoby couldn't tell. He wiped the sweat out of his eyes with his meaty fingers. Yes, it was a man. Running through the undergrowth, parallel to the road, dodging trees, trying to stay hidden. Jacoby tensed up in his seat. He looked around and saw that everyone else in his jeep was oblivious to their surroundings. From Jacoby's point of view, one of the soldiers in the jeep ahead yelled something to the others before vomiting out the side of the vehicle. Both jeeps stopped. From both sides of the flanking jungle came a barrage of rocks the size of tennis balls. The rocks slammed into the exposed soldiers and jeeps, banging and bruising all they hit. The soldiers filed out of their vehicles and unslung their rifles. They wasted no time firing into the trees where the attack originated. The rocks immediately quit flying. No one moved. Jacoby was crouched low in his seat while everyone else was on the road. He eventually left the safety of the jeep, making sure his hand rested on his pistol at all times. He held his breath as he and the men watched and listened. Other than the initial strike, none of the rocks landed any serious blows. Everyone on the narrow path looked at each other. They had difficulty believing the last 15 seconds actually happened. Captain Floor turned towards his comrades. "All right," he said. "We must be close. Let's get back." A large rock cratered into the captain's face, silencing him and ensuring a closed-casket funeral. The other soldiers, Jacoby included, immediately fired their weapons in the direction of the deadly projectile. A soldier raced to the fallen captain. He looked over at Jacoby and said, "He's dead." That meant Jacoby was now in charge. The constable straightened up. There was only one course of action now, a course of action he was more than willing to take. "Put him in the jeep," he ordered. "We're going home." A man erupted from the surrounding bush. The man was disheveled and dirty, obviously due to life free of nutrition and hygiene. However, this was no fashion show. His face was set in a determination that was almost primal in intensity. His objective was soon made clear. His first target was the officer kneeling by Floor. The man deftly clawed the soldier's throat out to the awe of the armed force. Before anyone could react, another dozen men spilled out from the trees with the same murderous intent. Jacoby kept his distance from the carnage. His men fought hard, but the animals that came out of the jungle kept coming. Even the few who were shot would not give the soldiers any quarter. However, all men are mortal, and even the attackers started to fall one by one. Jacoby headed to a jeep. One of his fellow soldiers ran into him. The man's face was ripped open on the right side from his eye down. "Help," the soldier croaked. The constable pushed the injured man away. The attacker who maimed the soldier's face threw a handful of deadly rocks at Jacoby. Jacoby fired once at the attacker, killing him. Jacoby had no time to dwell on what he just did. It didn't matter anyway. He was alive and the other man was not. He made it to the Jeep where escape awaited. Escape and life. Jacoby U-turned, plowing over some vegetation. Wait! Jacoby didn't dare stop. Wait for us! The final 2 surviving soldiers tried to make for the fleeing Jeep, but the constable pulled away from them, leaving them to an awful end. Nolan paced back and forth in the constable's dimly lit office. The grocer's son and daughter were at Jacoby's desk, heads down, asleep or pretending to be. A commotion from outside drew Nolan's attention. He joined the guard station outside the office. He looked up at Nolan as he approached, his expression wary. He's back, the guard plainly stated, nodding to the bar down the street. It was now full night. Sickly yellow light shone out of every glassless window there. Townspeople piled into the place like ants swarming over a dropped piece of beef. Jacoby's Jeep was sloppily parked outside the joint. Constable's back, the guard said. He is alone. The bar was already packed with curious townsfolk. Everyone inside jammed around Jacoby, who was at the bar drinking whiskey straight from a bottle. As he pushed his way through the crowd, Nolan couldn't help but wonder if there was anything he could do to make things right. Could he somehow make up for his mistakes, or was it too late? Nolan edged up to the constable. Ah, father, Jacoby said. Come, join me. He offered Nolan his bottle, but the priest slid it away. What happened? Nolan demanded. Where's Floor? Where's everybody else? Everybody? I am everybody. Jacoby laughed and then took another swig. Nolan just glared at the constable. Jacoby had no choice but to buckle under the priest's stare. Dead, Jacoby said, sobering up. He relived the massacre as he slowly spoke. They came out of the jungle. The townspeople clung to every word the man spoke. They? Nolan said. Who? I don't know. There are hundreds of different tribes that live out there. Tribes? Not tribes. Death cults? I should not have said that. Jacoby sighed. Sweat poured off his face and onto the bar counter. There are those who worship death, Jacoby said. You must know about these people. You're crazy, Nolan replied. These people sacrifice strangers, sometimes each other, and babies. Jacoby turned to the crowd. Sacrifices for everyone, on me. The audience gasped. Nolan shook his head. I don't believe. You believe what you want, father, and they will believe what they want. Jacoby snatched up the whiskey bottle and proceeded to head upstairs. Nolan stepped in his way. Where are you going? We need to get help. Jacoby went around the pest. I'm going upstairs. He was about to add something, but didn't. Disgusted, Nolan left the bar. Rosallo's village would never become a tourist destination. Several huts, built from scrap wood and metal, were spaced out amid chicken coops and rusted-out automobiles. Chickens threatened to overtake the population, but no villager paid any mind to their numbers. Here, plopped down in the middle of a thick jungle, far from prying eyes, was a haven where laws were for fools and children. In one of the huts, Rosallo and 2 of his followers stood over an unconscious Marie. Night was following, so a few lit candles were placed around the woman. The light wasn't for her comfort, though. It was there so the men could watch her suffer in her final hours. Her chest bandage was soaked through with sweat and blood. She slept, fitfully, moaning and twitching the entire time. Rosallo's face showed no trace of humanity. Soon, Rosallo said, our child will bear witness to that sweet, cold emptiness. Then you will. I'll take my time with you again. The police, one of the men dared to say. They'll try to rescue her again. Rosallo grunted. I'm not impressed with their heroics. Besides, this is a big jungle. We know where we are. They do not. He looked down at his wife for a moment longer before leaving. His men lingered, possibly offering a silent prayer for Marie, but probably not. The duo then left. All was still, save for Marie's labored breathing. Minutes or hours later, a hand caressed her cheek. A familiar sensation from 1,000 years ago. Marie could barely open her eyes. She backed away from the hand, which belonged to a woman roughly her age. Angelina? Marie mumbled. Angelina had gentle features, soft, peaceful, and clean, which went against the grain here. She was someone Marie talked to when the men were not around. Their conversations were brief, but they reassured the women that they were not alone despite the desolation they felt. "It's all right," Angelina whispered. She looked over her shoulder. "Can you walk?" Marie thought about it before nodding. She hurt all over, but she realized numbness was seeping into her body. Numbness and cold. Angelina helped Marie up. "Easy," Angelina said. "My baby." Marie wobbled, but Angelina was there to steady her. The last few hours flashed through Marie's mind. She flinched. The duo tiptoed to the door. Marie pulled back. "My baby, my child." Angelina cast her gaze to the ground. "We will avenge him." Marie's eyes shot open. "He's dead?" Angelina shook her head. "But we cannot save him. We must leave. We can have our revenge." Marie began to cry. This couldn't be happening, not to her. She thought she was protected because of her husband. However, things changed, and she didn't know when or how they did. "I know what you feel," Angelina said. "They took mine. We cannot linger here. They'll return any second now." Marie backed further into the hut, retreating into the dark. Angelina took her by the hand and dragged her outside. The two women appeared to be the only people out, but that didn't dissuade Angelina from being overly cautious. Marie was dragged along, barely a participant in her own escape. "We have to go," Angelina urged. "Where?" "Some of us who've had our loved ones taken have gathered a few miles from here. We've been waiting for there to be enough of us." "Enough? For what?" Angelina was about to answer, but shook her head instead. She pulled Marie back onto the path out of the village. There would be time for explanations later. Nolan barged into the constable's office. The sleeping girl at the desk stirred. Her brother stood by the door, watching Nolan race around like a madman. The boy was so calm. Even in the dirty light of the office, the oak gun cabinet could be seen along the wall next to the desk. Any of the guns in the cabinet would have done the job. The rifles, the pistols. He reached for a rifle, but then paused. "I'm going to get myself killed," he declared. "Is that God's will?" Nolan swallowed before selecting a rifle, a pistol, and ammo clips for both. The last item he picked was a halogen flashlight. Outside, a vehicle's brakes squealed to a halt. Nolan thought it was Jacoby. Fully armed, he went outside. 10 jeeps packed full of armed men took over the narrow street. More soldiers. One man who could have been Floor's twin brother was barking orders to the soldiers. He saw Nolan come towards him and met the priest halfway. "So," he called out to the priest in near-perfect English, "you're the American." The man saw the rifle in Nolan's hands. "You're already prepared. Good." The man greeted Nolan with a light, friendly slap on the shoulder. "A prepared man. I like that." "Constable Jacoby isn't here, I presume?" "He's at the bar," Nolan replied. "Of course he is," the man simply stated, neither surprised nor angry. He looked into the office behind Nolan. The grocer's son stood in the doorway, casually watching the latest commotion. "The children. The storekeepers?" "Yes." "Who are you?" The man extended his hand. "Captain Raymond. I'm the backup in case Captain Floor didn't report in." He gestured to the men he brought. "And I brought friends." "Hope you brought enough," Nolan said. "The others were wiped out." Raymond soberly nodded. "But now we know what to expect. I can count on you on coming with us?" It took Nolan only a second before answering, but in that long second, every conviction he had battled with his every yen to save Marie and her baby. "I have to go with you." "Good. I'll station some men here to watch the children in the town. Now, Father, shall we gather up the constable?" Angelina trod through the jungle without missing a step. She obviously knew where she was going in the near dark of the evening. Marie now followed of her own volition, not caring where they were headed. The women made their way through the dense jungle undergrowth, the rustle of leaves and twigs crunching under their feet filling the air. They tried to keep their escape as silent as possible, but the jungle betrayed their efforts with their every step. As they emerged from the foliage, the sweet smell of burning wood and the acrid scent of smoke greeted their noses. Before them lay a small clearing outlined with 4 tents, which circled a tiny dugout fire pit. 2 women sat around the fire. The first woman had short curly hair that framed her heart-shaped face. The other woman had long auburn hair that cascaded down her shoulders. Her face was solemn. It was evident that the recent events had taken a toll on her. She looked up at the new arrivals, recognizing Marie almost instantly. "Marie!" she exclaimed. "Anna?" They hugged and began to cry. "My baby," Marie cried, burrowing her face into the other woman's shoulder. "Anna, my baby." "It's all right," Anna replied. "Shh. We're going to make them pay." Rosallo couldn't wait until dawn. He stood alone outside of the hut that held Marie. His eyes were shut. He felt a warm buzz in the air. It wasn't the heat or humidity. It was what he sensed before each time he ended a life. The anticipation of death. Some of the people he charmed enough to join him in his village used drugs to get high. He used death. A shout came from the hut. Then one of his men. "She's gone!" Rosallo opened his eyes. He couldn't believe she would run again. He couldn't believe she even had the strength to get off the ground. Rosallo calmly told the panicked villager, "Get the men. All of them." The man ran through the village, banging on doors, rousing the males. Those in huts stepped out, some putting clothes on as they moved. Their wives peeked out at them as they joined the small mob that formed in the center of the village. No one was tired. They weren't sleeping. They knew Rosallo's sacrifice would be at dawn, a few hours away. They didn't dare sleep or indulge in other pleasures for fear of missing it. As soon as the men gathered, their leader addressed them. "I do not have a speech to motivate you," Rosallo said. "Instead, I ask a simple favor." He gestured to the jungle around their settlement. "My wife has fled us again. Last night I asked you to bring her back to me. Now I ask you again. Please find her. And don't be gentle." Angelina, Marie, Anna, and 6 other women sat around the small fire. Not recognizing the other women was understandable. Only the men in the village were allowed to socialize. An old woman dressed in a battered house dress slumped out of a tent. All the women except Marie turned to her. A few got up to join the old woman to discuss something quietly and hurriedly. The elder watched Marie as they spoke. The old woman stepped over to Marie and rested her wrinkled hand on her head. Marie tried to smile at the kindly matron. "Marie, this is Sari," Angelina said. "She's a magic woman." "What?" Marie tried, but her mouth was dry. "What does that mean?" "She's been through what all of us have," Anna said, "and more." Sari opened her ancient mouth to reveal that half her tongue had been cut out. Marie recoiled. "They murdered our children," Angelina said. "Our sisters. Everyone we loved. They took so much from us. Marie, will you help us take from them?" "Take what?" The look in each woman's eyes was cold, hard, and detached, save for Sari's. She sadly smiled. With difficulty, she answered, "Life." A rustling in the jungle startled everyone. "We must go," Angelina told Marie, "with or without you. Your baby is dead. Your husband the murderer. You are already wounded beyond our repair. What do you have left?" The women began to file out from the camp, leaving the tents and their few scant belongings behind. Sari led them. The choice is yours, Anna said. What choice? Marie thought before replying. What must I do? Angelina offered her warm hand to Marie. Come with us. Led by Sari, the group of women swiftly and efficiently split up to evade the search party. Marie found herself with Anna and Angelina, who were also trying to keep a low profile. As they moved deeper into the jungle, they could hear male voices echoing through the night. The men were getting closer. The three women halted and remained silent, listening intently to the rustling of leaves and crackling of branches. Anna and Angelina were visibly afraid, while Marie was just along for the ride. A harsh beam of light cut through the darkness and swept past them. Two of Rosallo's men walked by, talking softly. The women ducked down just as the men passed a few yards from them. Marie began to tremble, but Angelina was there to calm her. It wasn't fear that struck Marie. Her body was failing her. She would be dead soon. She smiled. As soon as the men were out of earshot and their beam was a dying speck, the women rushed away, not caring about making a commotion. The men wouldn't be able to hear past their own noise. However, the women were not out of danger yet. Another pair of men crossed the path the women left behind. Both groups were unaware of each other. A loud shout from one of the men. Another shout in response. The two groups of men reversed course and headed back to the village, inadvertently following the women. Marie wanted to turn and look, but Anna jerked her attention forward. The women suddenly veered right just as the men's light blasted the spot where they turned. Rosallo's men moved on, as did the three women. Marie was grateful when they soon came upon a small clearing. She could now lay down and die. The absence of trees in this spot was unusual. The ground was littered with rows of wooden stakes embedded in the earth. The sight of the stake should have sent a chill down her spine. The other women from the camp were already waiting. Sari was positioning each at a stake. A graveyard, Marie soon realized. The village graveyard. Marie had never been to the graveyard despite the many deaths in the village. The men buried the dead and everyone tried to forget about them. But these women remembered. Come, Marie, Anna said. It's too late to turn back. They will kill you if you do. Angelina was already at a grave. Sari beckoned Marie and Anna over. I'm tired, Marie told Anna. Anna smiled. You'll see your baby again. Did you name him? Marie watched every woman step into place. A few looked uncertain, but no one lost their confidence. Jean-Paul, she answered. Then you'll see little Jean-Paul again. Come. Anna led Marie to a grave. Be strong, Anna said. She kissed Marie's cheek. Goodbye. And then she was soon over her own grave, and Marie was alone. Sari visited each woman and handed them a mean sliver of bone. She made sure to close their hands over the sharp instruments. Finally, she gave one to Marie. In the gentlest of motions, Sari pantomimed running the bone over her throat. She then patted Marie's face. That is all, Sari managed to say. Sari left to go stand on her own grave. Marie considered the bone in her hand. She looked over at Anna, who nodded to her. Angelina stared at the ground at her feet, lost in her introspection. She was talking to herself or God or the person her suicide was going to resurrect. Then, a final silence. The 10 women looked at each other. This would be the last time they would see a living soul again. One by one, the women raised the bones to the edges of their throats. Marie was the last. Sari closed her eyes and swayed back and forth. She whispered a barely audible prayer, a wish for vengeance. She was the first. Soundlessly, she fell forward. She landed face first on the crude grave. Blood from her jugular quickly soaked the ground. As she fell, the others, save for Marie, followed suit. None fought death. They convulsed, gasped. Angelina, who wept, then Anna. Marie. The mother was calm, past the point of shock. Her stab wound would kill her anyway. She was sure of it. She took solace in knowing she would be with her child again, and that her husband would suffer for all his depravity. The sounds of dying soon faded as finality set in. Marie whispered, "Jean-Paul." She was the last to die. The gurgling ceased. The last muscle spasmed. 10 bodies bled dry onto the resting places of their fellow abused. It didn't matter whose grave they bled into. The deed was enough to reanimate. The intent was the spark and fuel. The jungle remained muted, as if every natural thing had fled the area. The last stream soaked into the earth, then nothing. Then a twitch. Not from any of the women. The red earth beneath Angelina pulsed, cracked. The other graves did the same. The place where Sari straddled bulged. Dirt fell from the thing coming up. It was human once. Its face was a sight to behold as it burst through the soil and emerged into the world of the living. Its complexion was pale, white, and ashen, a stark contrast to the vibrant greens and browns of the jungle. Its eyes were milky, void of any emotion, and seemed to be focused on nothing in particular. The cheeks were sunken, giving the impression of a gaunt, starved appearance. As it rose from its grave, purple veins were visible, road-mapping its body like a twisted work of art. It moved with a strange, otherworldly grace, as if it were still trying to figure out how its new form worked. And yet, at that moment, it seemed to embrace Sari, before rolling her body off of it and continuing on its path of destruction. 10 others also emerged from their forgotten graves. Marie's zombie, whoever he was, just stood. There was no gesture of affection, no emotion. 10 pale figures, adult males and females, stood next to their old resting places. Stood, as if waiting for some instruction. And the instruction from the ritual came and they set off, slowly, for the village. The search party returned. Each man stepped from the wilderness, slumped in defeat. They had let Rosallo down. There would be consequences. Already they planned schemes of escape. They really couldn't take any more death. Their yearning for another way of light, albeit one without a happy ending, had reached a nadir. And quite simply, they didn't want to die. Cowards in all respects, they let that point rest in the back of their heads. At the forefront was the matter of staying or fleeing. Before the search party could decide their course of action, they found themselves staring up the long barrels of soldiers' guns. Jacoby watched with growing unease as the men returning from the jungle were escorted to the center of the village. Raymond led his men, a smug smile on his face as if he had achieved some great victory. But Jacoby knew better. There was no victory. This was a tragedy waiting to happen. As the soldiers herded the villagers into the center of the village, Jacoby noticed that every single one of them was being held out in the open, under the watchful eye of the soldiers. The women huddled together, comforting each other as best they could. They knew that the soldiers weren't going to execute them, at least not right away. These soldiers were civilized, and that was their weakness. They wouldn't do anything wrong in the name of what was right. While the villagers plotted their next move, because that's what Jacoby would do to survive, Raymond's men began to search every shack in the village for the woman and child they were seeking. Nolan went off on his own. "Father!" From behind. Raymond. Nolan lowered his gun as Raymond ran up beside him. "This way, Father." Nolan nodded. Rosallo bundled Jean-Paul up in a blanket. This was not how it was supposed to go down. He hoped that the harlot he called wife had died painfully and alone. A man at the window watched the army activity. "Hurry," he told Rosallo. "They're coming this way." Confident, Rosallo replied, "I'm ready." Rosallo meant to flee into the jungle and wait the police out. They didn't know the jungle as he did. Often he believed he and the dense green were soulmates, united in their desolation. This was where he lived, and where he wanted to die. But not today. Two soldiers charged into the hut. Rosallo's man ran interference, allowing Rosallo to make a break through the rear. However, Raymond and Nolan were there, their guns drawn. The rifle in Nolan's hand shook, but he held tight. Rosallo's eyes darted all around like a trapped animal, desperately trying to find an exit. "There's nowhere to run," Raymond assured him. Rosallo pulled a knife from his waistband sheath and warded everyone away. He then placed the blade flat against the baby in his arms. Nolan was about to jump in, a knee-jerk reaction for sure, but Raymond held him back. "Don't," Raymond said. Then, to Rosallo, "Give us the baby." Rosallo grinned. Nolan swore he saw 2 rows of shark teeth in that mouth. "He will die here," Rosallo declared. Raymond shot Rosallo in his knife arm. Rosallo dropped both the knife and baby, but Nolan was there for the child. The 2 soldiers subdued Rosallo and his accomplice and dragged them both outside. "How is he?" Raymond asked Nolan. "He's..." Nolan fingered part of the blanket off of John Paul's innocent face. The baby looked up at the priest and almost smiled. Soldiers encircled the villagers. Although there was tension in the air, no one acted out of order. Rosallo stood among his followers, holding his injured arm. Blood dripped between his fingers. He kept looking for a way out, but the circle of soldiers was too tight. The villagers ignored their leader, resigned to the fact that this was the end of their way of life. The soldiers were antsy. Adrenaline surged through their bodies. On the way here, they were nervous. Now, they wanted to fight. Jacoby was chatting with one soldier when Raymond and Nolan joined the group. He saw that Nolan had the baby. The constable straightened to attention when Raymond and Nolan approached him. "Well, constable," Raymond said, "that's one unnecessary tragedy ended. You can thank me for cleaning up your mess by tendering your resignation when we get back to town." Nolan smiled. "Captain!" yelled one soldier. All eyes were on him as he pointed to the border of the village. All eyes followed his arm to his finger, and from there where the man pointed. The first pale figure cleared the dark jungle. Just behind him, the others. They should have been nothing but decayed matter, but the magic driving them forth gave them a stronger form. The soldiers and villagers didn't know any of this. All they could fathom was that these strangers were just wrong. The villagers tried to run, but the half-distracted soldiers managed to subdue them. A few villagers recognized the newcomers and for a few moments were lost in shock. One of the village women stepped away from her group and pointed at the other villagers. She started to laugh as if she'd lost her mind. "You're dead!" she shouted at them. "You're all dead!" She then shut up, realizing in that horrible moment that she would die too. Unease quickly spread among the villagers. These pale strangers weren't exactly strangers after all. They were family, neighbors, and victims. Those guilty of harming these unfortunate souls, dooming them in one way or another, felt their hearts drop into their stomachs. The bloody past had caught up with them. The soldiers looked at one another, wondering what was going on and what would happen next. Jacoby edged towards the jeep. No one paid attention to him. The zombies advanced slowly, then, without warning, sprinted towards their human targets, the villagers. A villager lost both his eyes as an intruder. His neighbor he killed after bedding the man's wife, raked at his face. Another villager went down under the weight of 2 familiar girls. A soldier tried to pry one of the intruders off a villager, but the monster knocked him away and then paused. The thing then turned on the soldier. As if telepathically connected, his brethren split their bloodlust equally among the villagers and soldiers. Everyone alive was fair game for the vengeance of the dead. True hell then broke loose. Bullets slammed into the intruders to no effect. This gradually dawned on the soldiers. Desperation slowly sank her claws into each man. Their will to survive was no longer tempered by confidence. Raymond was one of the few fighters left. He fired his revolver at the intruders, carefully avoiding his men but not caring about the villagers. Undeterred, Raymond eyed a nearby jeep. Right now there was no shame in fleeing. This was a battle he could not win. Rosallo tackled Raymond and began to choke the man with the arm Raymond didn't shoot. The struggle was brief. Rosallo managed to swipe Raymond's pistol and shoot him dead. Without remorse, Rosallo turned and emptied the gun into anything that moved. Once the gun was empty, he tossed it and sought an escape from the killing ground. Nolan made for a jeep. The priest's rifle hung clumsily over his shoulder as Nolan held Jean-Paul tight. A hut burst into flames. 2 intruders pulled a female villager out of the engulfed hut by her bare feet. Once outside, they bombarded her with punches. The woman screamed the whole time, more so when the monsters shoved their hands into her stomach and stretched out her innards. Nolan tried to ignore the inferno around him and strapped the baby into the front seat as much as a bundled baby could without a proper car seat. The priest discarded his rifle and jumped into the vehicle. As he revved the jeep, he spied Jacoby already taking off in a jeep of his own. "Damn him," Nolan said. He pulled out after the constable. Rosallo jumped in the back of Nolan's jeep just as it sped off. Nolan looked over at Jean-Paul, who was snug in the passenger seat. The baby gurgled as if the outside world didn't matter. Nolan checked his side mirror and immediately spotted a hand from inside the jeep snaking its way forward along the side. Nolan turned just as Rosallo struck like a rattler, jabbing the priest in the head. The jeep swerved, but Nolan quickly corrected the vehicle. Rosallo grabbed for the baby. Nolan slammed on the brakes. Rosallo flew through the measly windshield, taking it out in one piece, and landed somewhere in front of the vehicle. Nolan peered over the hood. Rosallo was still down. Rosallo. Evil. The darkest part of this chunk of the world. Unchecked, unrelenting. Rosallo had to be stopped. Nolan got out of the jeep and was instantly pummeled by the crazed man. Rosallo pounded him with a series of lefts. The priest went down. Rosallo picked up a large rock from the side of the road. The look of the man and the stone exuded nothing but menace and murder. "You have deprived me of my dream, outsider," Rosallo said. "For that, you will die." All Nolan saw was the rock in the madman's hand. "Tell me, priest," Rosallo continued, "how does it feel to know that your god has failed here?" Nolan got to one knee as Rosallo advanced upon him. "You have failed here," Rosallo said. Nolan tossed a handful of pebbles and dirt up, briefly confusing Rosallo. As soon as the earth flew, Nolan launched up from his position and tackled the man. Nolan laid into Rosallo with weak lefts and stronger rights. Rosallo let go of the rock. He tried to put up his hand to block Nolan's barrage. It did no good. Nolan grabbed the rock and smashed Rosallo's face in with one crunching blow. The morning was still fresh. Stray dogs and chickens were the only natives up. 2 soldiers were outside the constable's office. One had his chair tipped back on 2 legs. He was playing with the dirt underneath his fingernails. The other soldier leaned against the open doorway. He peeked inside at the sleeping grocer's children. The girl was curled up on the bare desk. Her brother was behind it, head down, a protective arm over her. The soldier who had been sitting went inside, leaving the other to settle in until the rest of the troops returned. Before he could get comfortable, he noticed movement from one end of the street. Someone staggering with speed. The soldier stood, straining his eyes to see who this stranger was. He tightened his grip around his rifle. It was no stranger. It was Jacoby, worse for wear. The constable's eyes were wide and wild. He was sweaty, completely out of breath, and possibly his mind. Constable? Jacoby pushed past him to get inside the office to safety. The other soldier inside stepped out of the bathroom just as Jacoby barged in. Jacoby began to barricade the front door with anything not nailed down. "Where's Captain Raymond?" one soldier asked, "and the other men?" The grocer's 2 children peeked out from the inner office. They stared at Jacoby, confused. "This was not supposed to happen, children," Jacoby ranted. We shot them and they kept coming. They should have died. And that damn priest. He settled down for a second before going back to his task of obstructing the door. A heavy knock on the door stopped everyone. A monster stared through the ventilation grate set halfway in the door. He banged his fists against the door, trying to get inside. His pale eyes were locked onto Jacoby. The soldiers brought their guns up to bear. "The back!" Jacoby yelled. "Block the back!" The soldiers shook off their shock and dashed into the rear of the building. Jacoby grabbed a revolver from the gun cabinet, loaded it, and brought it alongside his neck. He beckoned the quiet children to remain so. The monster kept knocking, then stopped. He slowly stepped out of sight. The grocer's children stood in the doorway of the inner office. The boy held his sister's hand. A jeep plowed through the front of the office. Planks of cheap wood splintered inward. Jacoby shielded his face with his hands. The jeep stopped just over the threshold of the building. Jacoby stepped back when he made out who was getting out of the vehicle. He grimaced. The priest. Nolan was banged up. His left arm hung limp at his side. His dirty face barely contained his simmering rage. It was a face that mirrored Rosallo's at its murderous peak. "You coward," Nolan spat. Jacoby backed away from the priest. "No, they were slaughtering us." "Us? You're still alive. You ran to save yourself." "No, that's not true." Nolan closed in on him, ready to beat him to death. "How many people have died because you failed to act?" Nolan said. "How many died because you ran away?" The white figure who was just at the door appeared behind Nolan at the shattered office front. He ambled over to Nolan. Nolan had no idea the monster was so close. Jacoby finally saw the undead thing. He raised his gun. The demon shoved Nolan out of the way. The priest fell into the office wreckage, unable to get up right away. Jacoby fired at the thing. Bullets pelted the revenant in the chest, drawing no blood and offering no protection. Jacoby threw his empty gun at the intruder. He turned to run into his inner office, but the grocer's children slammed the door shut and locked it before he could get in. Jacoby cried out in anguish. He tried not to look the monster in the eyes. Nolan watched on as the thing wrenched Jacoby's head back. Jacoby's meaty throat was fully exposed. The thing sank his black teeth into the constable's neck and throat. Jacoby's cries turned to bubbly gasps. The monster ripped away flesh, arteries, muscle, and sinew. Jacoby tried to collapse, but the monster held him up by his head. With his head in both hands, the man squeezed until Jacoby's skull broke and fragmented into his brain. Jacoby stopped squirming. The thing let go of Jacoby. He surveyed his handiwork impassively for a moment before turning to leave. From the ground, Nolan watched the creature walk past him. Once the demon, ghost, or whatever it was had gone outside, the priest managed to get up. Nolan stumbled into the street. He tried to find his second wind, but failed. All his energy was spent. The zombie ambled back to the jungle line. His 9 brethren were there waiting for him. They looked past him at the few townspeople watching this odd tableau. The zombie's blank stares were met with fearful gazes that longed for other, more pleasant sights. Once Jacoby's executioner joined his fellow resurrected, they entered the jungle, quickly disappearing from view. Their surreal presence followed them, leaving a vacuum as if they never existed in the first place. Due to the commotion at the constables, more townspeople converged in the street near Nolan. Puzzled conversations stoked their uneasiness. Nolan looked around at the townspeople and took it all in. The squalor, the life trying to thrive here, the depravity that got in the way of these people's lives. It overwhelmed him. The grocer's children rushed to him. A townswoman joined them. She had Jean-Paul cradled in her arms. The woman was the first person Nolan saw when he reached town. He asked her to keep the child until his confrontation with the constable was over. He had hoped she understood, and she obviously did. Grateful, Nolan took the baby from her. The baby giggled. Nolan smiled down at the child in his arms and the children by his side. The boy and girl had already been tainted by the desperation and evil of this place, but they were still young. Here was hope. Nolan smiled. Get out. Nolan turned to the source of the voice. An old woman. Get out. A middle-aged man with scabs on his lips. Were they warning him or tired of him and his interference? Get out. Another. Nolan swirled around. The small crowd began to say the same thing in an ambiguous tone, neither sinister nor pleasant. Get out. Nolan's mind swished with the sounds of each town person's voice. Get out. Nolan spun around in place and squeezed his eyes shut. The townspeople's chant kept him reeling. Still spinning, he tilted his head back, eyes now open, and stared as hard as he could at the blue sky high above.